Shabbat Shalom. I turned the television on Tuesday morning when I saw breaking news over CNN, another school shooting at a Maryland high school. I stopped in my tracks to make sure that the shooting wasn't where my sister works or where my friends' children go to school. Not that it should matter, of course, since any school shooting anywhere is horrible. I couldn't believe it. Again, in this week leading up to the March of Our Lives, in thinking about this, in preparation for this week's Parsha, Parshat Tzav, I was immediately drawn to the concept of sacrifice, because it is in this week's Parsha where we read over and over again about sacrifice. But it started last week. As Rabbi Dan Orenstein, a friend of mine, reminds us, Leviticus chapter 1, verse 2 begins God's instructions concerning the sacrificial offerings with the following words. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban. When any of you present an offering. These Hebrew words, Adam and mikem, when any of you. However, translated literally, the words actually mean, when any person from among you. Looking at these words, the rabbis of the Talmud sense that this Hebrew word, mikem, from among you, means something actually even more profound. Read even more literally, this word, mikem, actually means a part of you. Based on the strange features of these words, the Talmud concludes that when we read the first two verses of the book of Vayikra, we are saying the following. When you offer a sacrificial offering, it must be mikem, a part of you. Can a sacrifice be a part of us? Yes, for sure. And in any other year, this is how I would choose to teach this verse. That as we think about sacrifices, I would say that what we must mean is to sacrifice something, to give of ourselves. But today I want to challenge ourselves to realize that while there are things that we must sacrifice, we must not go too far. We must not sacrifice ourselves for a sacred cow of guns. Does this mean that I am trying to take away all guns? No. In fact, if we look at societies like Israel, there is a comfort level and a familiarity with guns, but we are not seeing this kind of violence. And yet, in our world, in our communities, in our schools, we are seeing these kind of sacrifices before our very eyes. As Rabbi Dan Orenstein writes, in relationship to the concept of sacrifice, right now, America's children, our children, are protesting with anguished vigor the unconscionable offering by adults to a most unholy and false God. The unconscionable offering is our children themselves, and that false God is the gun lobby. The nationwide student walkouts that took place last week and the National March for Our Lives that is taking place right now as we speak are a loud message which our children are sending to us, the adults who should be caring for them. You have no right to sacrifice us. We are not your korbanot. We are not your lambs that you can send to slaughter. In fact, this reminds me of the tragic statement of Golda Meir, when in talking about the conflict between Israelis and Arabs, she said, peace will come when the Arabs will love their children more than they hate us. In our time, that means peace will come when we love our children more than we love guns. As Jews, we scoff at child sacrifice, but we must ask, is this what we have been doing? As Rabbi Dan said, as an American, I do understand the need to reasonably protect America's Second Amendment rights. However, the NRA has gone too far by reacting wildly to every call for gun use regulation as a mortal threat to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How about our children's right to life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness? How about the rights of innocent moviegoers, college students, concert goers, ordinary Americans to be protected from being murdered by angry, violent, sick people who in many states can simply walk into a store or a gun shop and purchase a military-style assault weapon easier than it is for you or me to walk in and buy Sudafed? But here is the thing. Judaism teaches that the safety needs of the public take precedence over the desires of the individual. We must understand some core teachings in our tradition to understand why this issue today is real and why I am speaking about it from this bima. For if Judaism cannot address issues of our day, then what good is Judaism? This is not an issue of politics alone. This is an issue of how our tradition gives a window into behavior. In Leviticus, we read, don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. This is what we have been doing. In the Mishnah Torah, written by Maimonides, we learn, it is forbidden to sell arms of any kind to a heathen. One should not sharpen their weapons, one should not sell them a knife or anything that is likely to be a public danger. Shields, however, may be sold to them since they are only used for defense. And of course, a week from today, what will we be saying? Dayenu. It is enough. Recently, in New York Magazine, Eric Levitz wrote the following. It's been a few weeks since a heavily armed psychopath turned Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School into a war zone, and the survivors of that massacre have already changed gun politics in the United States for the better. With their act of witness and advocacy, the teenage protesters of Parkland, Florida, shook many voters out of their complacency about pervasive gun violence. Upwards of 30,000 people lose their lives to firearms in our nation each year, a level of carnage unparalleled anywhere in the world. And yet, last October, just days after the worst mass shooting in American history, the one in Vegas, only 52% of America told CNN pollsters that they supported stricter gun laws. But from October to now, that figure is now 70%, the highest it's been since 1993. The Parkland teenagers and the movement they have launched have made a vital contribution to American politics. They've stiffened the spines of Democratic gun safety advocates, unnerved Republican NRA members, improved the prospects of meaningful gun reform at a federal level in the medium term, and provided a model for civic engagement to a rising generation whose political participation our country desperately needs. Just a few weeks ago, we gathered in this sanctuary and we read from the book of Esther. We reminded ourselves of the obligation that when you have a voice, you must use it. As Mordecai said to Esther, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for such a crisis. In the book of Esther, when Esther is hesitant to speak out against the threat of violence her people face, Mordecai says this to her, but let us be clear. We are not guaranteed the deliverance will come from somewhere else. We must be the own agents of our own life-saving. Passover is coming. Rabbi Naomi Levy, an incredible rabbi, colleague, and someone who will be speaking here on May 14th, penned the following prayer this week. We will march for our children's sake. We will march because standing still is not an option. We will march because a new day is coming. We will march, young and old, hand in hand. We will march like the children of Israel at the foot of the sea. We will march until the raging waters part before us. We will march until our leaders act. We will march in honor of the innocent souls we have lost. We will march, turning the prayers of our hearts into action. We will march, praying with our feet. We will march to the beat of a mournful lament. We will march with our heads held high. We will march to finally end this madness. We will march, rejoicing in triumph. We will march, and we will win. By God, we will win. Today, we are celebrating a baby naming. We have welcomed Rebecca Jolie into our sanctuary, a place of safety. Schools, shuls, theaters, these should all be sanctuaries. And just as we hope for a life of Torah, learning, chuppah, loving, and gemilut chasadim, acts of kindness for Rebecca, may we extend those blessings to our country's children. And so finally, we think about the threefold blessing which we offer to our children on Friday night. But I'm shifting the words a bit. Here is my final prayer in thinking about our children. May we walk with them, may we learn from them, and may God grant all of us peace. Shabbat Shalom.